Welcome to this week's episode of Insight. This week's show is actually going to be a special in which we're going to study a troubling pattern, which is the almost complete concurrence of language and agendas by the Baku regime and the government in power in Yerevan. Now, what we will do is actually go from issue to issue where we show this congruence of messaging. The first and most important one, obviously, is the peace issue, the peace narrative, as I call it. There's a consistent message from this government, i.e., if they do not win re-election, there will be war, and that all of their opponents collectively are pro-war. Let's listen to the Prime Minister.
Ալնելույա պատերազմ սեպտեմբերին ու աղետաբեր պատերազմ եթե քաղաքացիական պայմանագիր կուսակցությունը սահմանադրական մեծամասնություն չեմ ասում ընտրություններում հաղթի ոնց ուզում եք ինձ ասում եք 18 տվին գայր ասեի հիմա ասում եմ.
Now let's hear the messaging from Novruz Oslanov from a few days ago, who is a member of their so-called parliament.
If Pashinyan is defeated in the elections, it will not only be the leader of civil contract who suffers a loss, but Armenia and the Armenian people as well. If the pro-Russian opposition comes to power, it is unlikely to amend the constitution. In that case, Azerbaijan could take reciprocal steps by adding provisions to its basic law concerning historically Azerbaijani lands that were, in its view, illegally alienated, particularly Zangezur. It would be interesting to see how they respond to such a move. I am quite serious in proposing this step if the war party comes to power in Armenia and the problematic reference to the Declaration of Independence remains in the preamble of the Armenian constitution. Our neighbors should not forget that they live on what we consider to be historically Azerbaijani lands. They should keep this in mind.
In analyzing this, let's be clear about one thing. There are no pro-war parties in Armenia, and no one is advocating war. That is a complete fiction that's actually repeated by this government and the regime of Baku. What is interesting is that a government that complains night and day about Russian interference has absolutely nothing to say about the functionaries of a neighboring country threatening our voters on a daily basis. Now let's move on to the international legal cases. And what is this about? It's about pulling the legal cases that we won against the regime in Baku, or actually still in the process of winning, in regards to the war crimes that were committed against Armenians during the 2020 war and after. And more clearly, it has to do with not filing ICC claims of ethnic cleansing against the regime in Baku for what happened in 23 in Artsakh. Just if you want to understand how sensitive the regime in Baku is about the ICC, look at what they had to say about Arad Mirzoyan's visit to the ICC headquarters to mark the 1-year ascension of Armenia legally joining the ICC.
We strongly reject and condemn the statement by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Armenia, Ararat Mirzoyan, aimed at Azerbaijan. This statement once again demonstrates that Armenia's accession to the Rome Statute is an attempt to use these institutions for its unfounded claims, malicious actions, hate speech, disinformation, and misinterpretation of international law.
Now let's understand what this means in real terms. This actually has two parts. The first one is political and practical, and the second one is moral and historical. Let's go over the political part first. The ICC weapon is for Armenia what the Straits of Hormuz are for Iran. Even the possibility of ICC charges for the ethnic cleansing in Artsakh in 23 is the sword of Damocles that hangs over the head of the regime in Baku. There's nothing that they fear more than that. They know that any kind of charges, any kind of investigation will lead to indictment of regime figures, and after that there's no more Davos, there's no more Swiss trips to EU. You essentially become Slobodan Milosevic overnight. People who dismiss this as a legal instrument, I would just ask you to look at Bibi Netanyahu, who was actually charged by the ICC. Look at his flight path to the United States, in which he avoids any country that is part of the ICC in the fear that they might actually bring his plane down and arrest him, which is not likely. But even he, who's one of the 2 or 3 most important people in the world, actually fears that. This is actually a deterrence tool for Armenia on par with US pressure on the regime in Baku. If you want the regime to bend on its knees for releasing the hostages, leaving our occupied territories, and actually signing the peace agreement, you need to use this method. not using this or having this as a weapon is nothing less than political malpractice. Now let's see what Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has to say about the squandering of this ICC weapon. These are statements that he made in regards to in a press conference in which he was asked if the ethnic cleansing in Artsakh in 23 was actually ethnic cleansing.
Ես այդ խոսույթը համարում եմ վնասակար, որովհետև մենք կարանք ասենք էթնիկ զտում, իրանք դեր ասցի հայլային ստանանք էթնիկ զտում, հետո ցեղասպանություն, հայլային ցեղասպանություն, հայլային ամեն ինչը հայլային, դա նշանակում է մուտք գործել կոնֆլիկտի ճանապարհ, որովհետև ես կարծում եմ, որ պետք է արդար իրականության հետևից գնալ եւ ոչ թե պատմական արդարությունը վերականգնելու հետևից գնալ.
What he was actually referring to is not filing the ICC cases for the ethnic cleansing in Artsakh. I know we sort of covered the political part of it. Now let's look at the historical and moral part of it. In recent history, there's absolutely no people in the world that have suffered genocide or ethnic cleansing that have not legally used legal instruments to punish the people who carried out the genocide or the ethnic cleansing, whether it's what happened in Bosnia with Serb militias, whether it's what Putin is doing in Ukraine, what Bibi Netanyahu has done in Gaza, and what the Myanmar generals did to the Rohingya minority. These legal issues that are being withdrawn also have to do with crimes that were actually committed in Armenia proper in 22 during the invasion of Yarmouk, which include the rape, murder, and mutilation of Armenian female soldiers and POWs. By not using this instrument against the regime, we are telling the world that ethnic cleansing and genocide will be punished for if it's committed against any group of people, except if it's committed against Armenians. This is a monstrous idea which will open the door for further aggressions and a repeat of what we have seen over and over for the past 100 years. Now let's move on to the Western Azerbaijan narrative, this fictitious narrative that Baku has created. There's an entire cottage industry of state-funded organizations that are pushing this narrative, and it's essentially to lay groundworks for future aggression and territorial claims against Armenia. Let's see what the dictator from Baku had to say about this.
Armenia was never present in this region before. Present-day Armenia is our land. Now that the Karabakh conflict has been resolved, this is the issue on our agenda. Of course, it was premature to talk about it before the Karabakh conflict was resolved. But we should not waste any time now. A concept of return should be developed.
Now let's see what's been the response from this government.
Now, I want to make an open and public proposal to Azerbaijan, because as much as they have problems with these topics, we have problems as well. I propose that we adopt a joint roadmap aimed at simultaneously putting these two issues to rest.
So instead of denouncing these baseless claims, which are a setup for future aggression, the Prime Minister actually uses this to attack other Armenians while creating fictitious moral equivalencies between these two claims. Most importantly, from a legal perspective, this issue of the supposed right of return for Azeris to Western Azerbaijan has already been dealt with the courts and rejected, while the right of return for the people of Artsakh to Artsakh is actually international law, guaranteed, and it's not something that he can actually give away because it's not up to him to ever give that away. Now let's move on to the controversies about the church, and let's see what the leading religious authority in Azerbaijan has to say about the Armenian church.
The Armenian church poses a great threat to Armenia and to all neighboring regional countries.
Now we'll move on to what Prime Minister Pashinyan has to say about the leader of the Armenian church that he actually no longer calls by his official title.
The
case of the church is in truth a bit more complex, is because they have domestic reasons to actually go after the church, and it doesn't have to be simply a diktat from Baku. Obviously, the church is seen as an instrument of Russia by this government. It's also the fact that the church itself, entered Armenian politics in ways that were completely unacceptable. But it is very hard not to notice that the big assault on the church that started last year came literally immediately after a conference in Switzerland that was orchestrated by the church and Swiss organizations talking about the right of return of people of Artsakh to Artsakh. And that cannot be a coincidence. Now let's discuss the constitutional changes. For the past 2 years, the regime in Baku has consistently demanded that Armenia changed her constitution in order to sign the so-called peace agreement, something that is, by the way, not mentioned in the agreement itself. And in fact, this demand actually violates a point of the agreement, which is that you cannot interfere in another country's internal politics. So in response to this, Nikol Pashinyan, instead of denouncing what this is and giving the reasons that I just outlined, says the following.
Նոր սահմանադրության մեջ անկախության հռչակագրին հղում պետքա չլինի եւ ասեմ ինչու որովհետեւ անկախության հռչակագիրը կառուցված է կոնֆլիկտի տրամաբանության վրա չենք կարող մենք կոնֆլիկտի տրամաբանության վրա գնալ եւ ուզենալ անկախ պետություն կառուցել.
We need to understand what this is, and it's actually about three things. First and foremost is to actually humiliate our country, to say that we forced this democratic people in this democratic country to change their constitutions on the whims of a dictator. The second is to cause internal discord and divisions among Armenians inside of Armenia. And lastly is to, since they actually know this is very likely to fail, because once people understand this constitutional changes are actually the Aliyev constitutional changes, they're very likely to fail. It gives them the opportunity to go to the world and say, see, the Armenians had a chance to vote for peace and they voted for war. Putting our country through this, which is what this government is doing, is nothing less than political malpractice. I want to give some perspective to this because in reality, what I outlined is not true in every single case. There are places and examples which will contradict the examples that I've made. However, if the narrative between the government in Armenia and the government in Baku is the same in the 80th percentile, it is very hard not to notice that. Overall, if we want to understand what this process is, there's actually a phrase in political science, and it's called Finlandization. Finlandization is the process by which a more powerful country makes a smaller neighboring country refrain from opposing the former's foreign policy rules while allowing it to keep its nominal independence and its own political system. The phrase came from the very unique relationship between the Soviet Union and Finland between 1945 to 1991. After World War II, Finland was not incorporated into the Eastern Communist bloc, but kept its independence to run its internal affairs while being especially sensitive to any issue that might be seen problematic by the Soviet Union in both domestic and foreign policy. In our case, this special sensitivity actually explains some of the more bizarre actions of this government, which make little political sense, such as the firing of the museum director for giving J.D. Vance a book about ethnic cleansing in Artsakh in the early 20th century, the removal of Ararat from our entry stamps, which is, I'm sure, something that no Turkish official ever asked for. Not referring to our hostages in Baku by calling them hostages or prisoners, by calling them something that is just completely ununderstandable. Not noting any of the days of the disasters that we've had from September 13th, the Jermuk invasion, to September 19th, which is the start of the ethnic cleansing in Artsakh, and September 27th, which is the start of the war in 2020. They make sure that they never note any of these days. Well, the rest of the country actually visits our memorials and grave sites in that day. And obviously not using the phrase Artsakh, which they're actually quite proud about. All of the things that I just outlined are political losers. So you have to ask yourself why they would do this. And the only explanation is that we have a leadership that is entirely Finlandized. And I think the struggle of the next few years, especially if this government wins re-election, will be their effort to Finlandize, to have our population, internalize this as something that is acceptable to the whole of the country. In conclusion, for us as a people, the most pathetic part of all this is that Finland was actually Finlandized by a world power, a nuclear power. Our leaders have actually Finlandized this country for the purposes of a futureless 9th century sultanate. I'm sure many people who watch this broadcast will go, aha, this is the proof that we wanted to show that our leaders are actually traitors or work for the other side, the dreaded Davajan word in Armenian. But it's actually far worse than that. What they are fearful mediocrities who know little about the world,
who think their primary task is to manage weakness rather than to build on strength. Thank you for joining me in this week's episode of Insights.
Մենք պիտի հաղթենք, որովհետև մենք պարտվելու տարբերակ չունենք։ Հայ ժողովուրդը պետք է գոյություն ունենա հավիտյան։ Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունը պետք է գոյություն ունենա հավիտյան։ Արցախը պետք է ապրի։ Եվ Արցախը պետք է լինի ինքնորոշված, եւ Արցախը պետք է լինի անկախ, ինքնուրույն, հզոր եւ հպարտ, ինչպես այսօր է, ինչպես եղել է։ Եվ ուրեմն այսօրվա մեր հավաքը, այսօրվա մեր նիստը միասնության, վճռականության եւ հաղթանակի մասին է։ Պատրաստեք ձեզ հաղթանակի, պատրաստեք ձեզ նվիրումի, պատրաստեք ձեզ զոհողության, որովհետեւ սա վճռական ժամանակ է։ Եվ մենք միասնական ենք քան երբևէ։ Եվ ուրեմն կեցցե ազատությունը, կեցցե Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունը, կեցցե Արցախի Հանրապետությունը։ Եվ կեցցենք եւ մենք եւ մեր երեխաները, որ ապրելու ենք ազատ եւ երջանիկ Հայաստանում, ազատ եւ երջանիկ Արցախում։ Փառք հայոց բանակին, փառք հայոց զինվորին, շնորհակալ եմ։